Jake had always been a man who took pride in his success. He owned a cozy little cafe in the middle of the city, a place where the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of cheerful chatter filled the air every day. His business was thriving, and he had worked hard to get there. But with all the success, he was also used to a routine: get up early, brew the coffee, serve the customers, and then close up shop late at night. Life was busy, predictable, and comfortable. Jake had everything he needed and more. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly and the city buzzed with activity, Jake was finishing his lunch when he saw her. Sitting on the curb outside his cafe, there was a girl who looked out of place. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with worn-out clothes and a tired face. Her hair was tangled, and she held a trumpet case in her hands. She wasn't begging or causing trouble, just sitting there, looking around, lost in thought. Jake didn't think much of it at first. Homeless people were a common sight in the area, especially around his cafe, where people often passed by without a second glance. But something about her caught his attention. She wasn't like the usual crowd. While others might have been asking for spare change or food, she simply sat there, gazing into the distance, as if waiting for something. He went back to his work, serving customers, and tried to ignore her. But a few minutes later, the girl stood up and approached the entrance of the cafe. She didn't look like someone who would be ordering a coffee or browsing the menu. Jake saw her walk towards him, her eyes slightly nervous, yet determined. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the noise of the cafe. Jake looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Can I play for a free meal?" Jake blinked in surprise. He had heard many strange requests in his time, but this was something new. Most homeless people asked for money or food directly, but here was this girl asking for something that seemed a little different. Play for a free meal? It didn't make sense. He couldn't help but chuckle. "Play? For a meal? You mean like a song?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded, looking hopeful. "I play the trumpet. I can play something for you. If you like it, maybe you could give me a meal." Jake didn't know whether to laugh or just brush her off. He had never heard of anyone offering to perform for food, especially someone who appeared to be struggling. But there was something in her eyes that made him pause. It wasn't desperation. It was more like pride. She didn't ask for charity. She was offering something in return. Jake felt a slight tug of curiosity. He had seen countless musicians on the streets, but most of them weren't this bold. This wasn't just another beggar asking for a handout. This was someone who had something to offer, something different. Still, he was skeptical. Could this girl actually play? Or was it just another odd encounter? "All right," Jake said, still smiling at the oddity of the situation. "If you really want to play, go ahead. Let's see what you've got." The girl's face brightened up. She opened her trumpet case with careful hands, revealing an instrument that had clearly seen better days. It wasn't shiny or new, but there was something almost comforting about it, as if it had traveled through many experiences with her. She lifted it to her lips and began to play. At first, Jake wasn't sure what to expect. He had heard plenty of street musicians, but he had never been impressed by most of them. They played the same tired tunes, hoping for spare change. But this was different. The sound of the trumpet was soft at first, then slowly grew louder, filling the air with a beautiful melody that seemed to echo through the street. It wasn't just a song. It was a story of someone who had been through pain and hardship, but still carried something beautiful inside. The music was raw, emotional, and deep. For a moment, Jake forgot that he was running a cafe and was simply lost in the music. As Lily continued to play, the usual noise of the cafe and the bustling street faded away. It was as if time had slowed down, and in that brief moment, Jake realized something. This girl, with nothing but her trumpet and her talent, had managed to make him forget everything around him. She wasn't just asking for food. She was offering something far more valuable, a piece of herself through her music. Jake stood there, mesmerized as the last note of her performance hung in the air, slowly fading away. The cafe was silent for a second, and then, without realizing it, Jake found himself clapping. He had been moved, not by her situation, but by her talent and the way she had shared it with him so freely. The girl, Lily, smiled shyly, and for the first time, Jake felt a deep sense of respect for her. Without another word, Jake walked to the counter, grabbed a plate of food, and handed it to her. "You've earned it," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. It was the least he could do for someone who had given him such a moment of unexpected beauty. Jake had never imagined that a simple conversation could change the course of his day. But as Lily sat across from him at a small table in his cafe, there was something about her that intrigued him, something beyond her surprising trumpet talent. He had offered her a meal as a gesture of gratitude, but now as they spoke, he found himself wanting to know more about this mysterious girl who had been living on the streets, yet still had the confidence to ask for a chance. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Jake asked, still fascinated by the way her music had stirred something deep inside him. Lily looked down at the half-eaten sandwich on her plate, her fingers tracing the edges of the bread nervously. She wasn't looking up at him. It was as if the question had unlocked something painful, and she didn't quite know how to express it. For a moment, Jake thought she might not answer at all. But then slowly her eyes met his, and the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. "I used to play in a band," she said, her voice soft but steady. "A long time ago. My parents were musicians too, classical music. We traveled a lot. They taught me everything I know. I guess you could say music was my whole world. It was always about the music, you know? It didn't matter where we lived, as long as there was a stage and an audience." Jake nodded, listening intently. He wasn't sure where this story was going, but he could tell that Lily wasn't just talking about a hobby. Music had been a part of her identity, something she was born into, something that shaped her life. But as Lily spoke, Jake could sense a sadness behind her words. There was a deep ache in her voice that spoke of loss, a loss that didn't just come from the streets, but from something far more personal. He waited for her to continue. "Everything changed when my parents lost their jobs," she continued, her voice quieter now. "It wasn't just the money. We lost everything, our house, our car, the life we had. I didn't really understand it at the time, but it was like one day we had everything, and the next we had nothing." She paused, taking a deep breath. Jake could see the pain in her eyes as she remembered those days. "We tried to keep playing, but it got harder. My mom and dad fought a lot. The stress, everything got to them. They lost their spark. It wasn't the same anymore." Lily's fingers clenched around her cup of coffee, her knuckles turning white. "Eventually, they both just disappeared. I ended up in a group home for a while, but I couldn't stay there. It was too much. And that's when I ended up here on the streets." Jake felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to Lily's story. The girl he had seen sitting outside his cafe, so quiet and unassuming, had once lived a life filled with music and love. Now here she was, a young woman who had lost everything, yet still carried that same music with her, even in the most difficult of times. "I still have my trumpet," Lily added, her voice now tinged with a mixture of pride and sadness. "It's the only thing I have left from those days. It's all I've got. And even though I've been through so much, I can't let go of it. It's the only piece of my old life that still makes sense to me." Jake sat there for a long moment, digesting her words. He had always taken his comfortable life for granted. He never really considered how easily everything could change, how quickly someone could go from being part of a family, surrounded by love and security, to being alone on the streets, clinging to memories and the remnants of a past life. But Lily wasn't just clinging to memories. She was still holding on to something precious, her music. It was the one thing that had kept her going, even when everything else had fallen apart. "And you're still playing," Jake said, his voice filled with admiration. "Despite everything, you're still playing." Lily nodded, a small, wistful smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Music is the only thing that feels real to me. It's like, when I play, I can forget about everything else, just for a little while. The world fades away, and it's just me and the trumpet. It's the one thing I know I'm good at. The one thing I know I can still do." Jake stared at her, trying to understand the strength she had within her. Here was a girl who had lost almost everything but still held on to something so deeply personal and powerful. It was almost as if the music was her way of healing, of finding a piece of herself that couldn't be taken away, no matter how hard life had tried. "Do you ever think about going back to performing? Maybe even professionally?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, you're really talented. People would want to hear you." Lily hesitated, her eyes falling to the table as if she was weighing his words. For a moment, might laugh it off or refuse to even entertain the idea. But then, after a long pause, she spoke softly. "I've thought about it," she admitted. "But it's hard. I don't even know where to begin anymore. It's like I've been on the outside of the music world for so long, I'm afraid I don't belong there anymore. Who would want to hear a homeless girl playing the trumpet?" Jake shook his head, feeling a pang of frustration at her self-doubt. "You'd be surprised. You've got something special, Lily. People will listen." Lily's eyes flickered up at him, a mixture of hope and skepticism in her gaze. She didn't say anything, but Jake could see the wheels turning in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for her to reclaim the life she had once dreamed of. And maybe, just maybe, Jake could help her find a way. The next day, Jake couldn't get Lily out of his mind. Her music had haunted him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him think deeply about the world. He had grown up with everything he could ever need: comfort, stability, and opportunities that most people could only dream of. But here was a girl who had nothing, yet had this remarkable gift. This trumpet that seemed to hold all her pain, joy, and resilience. It bothered him that someone like her could fall through the cracks of society. He knew he had to do something. Lily was back outside the cafe the following afternoon. She was sitting on the same curb, her trumpet case open beside her, not playing yet, but looking as though she were waiting for the right moment. Jake watched her for a while through the cafe window. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't begging. She was simply sitting there, letting the world pass her by, as if she was a part of the background. It struck him as strange the way people ignored her. Everyone passed by without a second thought, their lives too busy to notice the girl with the trumpet. He couldn't let her stay like this. He had to offer her something more than a meal this time. Jake stepped out of the cafe, crossing the sidewalk with determination. As he approached, Lily didn't notice him at first. She was lost in thought, staring at the trumpet in her hands. When she finally looked up, her face lit up with a soft, shy smile, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, like she wasn't sure if he'd show up again. "Hey," Jake greeted her, his voice warm. "You around here often?" Lily nodded, glancing up at him, her fingers absent-mindedly running along the edges of the trumpet. "Yeah, usually around this time. I like the way the sun hits this spot. Gives the city a warm feel. Mind if I sit down?" Jake asked, gesturing to the space beside her. Without waiting for her to answer, he sat down next to her on the curb. She didn't seem uncomfortable with his presence, more surprised maybe. She probably hadn't expected him to return. "So," Jake began, "I've been thinking. You really are something special, you know? What you did yesterday ... That wasn't just a little street performance. That was ... powerful." Lily looked down at her trumpet, her fingers still playing with the mouthpiece. She didn't seem convinced. "Thanks," she said quietly, though the doubt was still evident in her voice. "But like I told you, I'm not sure I have what it takes anymore. My life, It's just too far gone. Jake looked at her, wondering how she could be so disconnected from her own talent. He could see the raw emotion in the way she played, the kind of skill that made people listen. "Listen," Jake said, leaning in a little. "I get that life hasn't been kind to you. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve a chance. You've got the kind of talent that could make people sit up and pay attention." Lily sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know, Jake. It's not just about playing. It's about where I've been, who I am now. People aren't going to listen to someone like me. I'm a nobody." Jake shook his head, frustrated. "You're not a nobody. You're Lily, and what you've got is worth sharing. People don't care where you've been. They care about what you bring to the table right now." Lily looked up at him, searching his face for sincerity. For a moment, she said nothing. Jake was starting to wonder if his words were just falling flat when, without a word, she opened her trumpet case and placed the instrument in her hands. She was still unsure, but something in Jake's voice seemed to stir something inside her. Then, as if on cue, she began to play. At first, it was slow, a soft melancholic melody that seemed to echo the sadness she'd just shared with him. The notes hung in the air like fragile threads, barely audible against the bustling city. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. But then something incredible happened. Lily's fingers found their rhythm, and the music began to build. It wasn't just a song now, it was a full-out performance. The melody started to soar, rising higher and higher, with each note more powerful than the last. It was like a wave crashing through the noise of the world around them, something pure and untouchable. Jake couldn't help but smile. Her music wasn't just about the notes. It was about her spirit, her fight to keep going despite everything. As she played, her body moved with the music, as though every part of her was connected to the sound. There was passion in the way she held the trumpet, and the energy she gave off was infectious. The crowd that had been walking by slowly began to notice, their steps slowing as they heard the trumpet's melody fill the air. Jake watched as more and more people stopped to listen, their faces lit up with wonder. A few even stood, looking around as though they weren't sure where the music was coming from. But knowing it was something they needed to hear, Lily's performance went on for what seemed like hours, though it was only a matter of minutes. When she finally stopped, the silence was almost deafening. Jake didn't know what to say. He was speechless. He had seen her as a girl who just wanted a meal, but now he realized that she was capable of so much more. She had a gift, a talent that could change her life if she allowed it. The small crowd that had gathered began to clap, and Lily's face lit up with surprise. It was the first time in a long time that someone had recognized her for something other than her circumstances. Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. This was the moment. This was the chance, see? Jake said with a grin. "You've got something." People noticed. "You've got a future in this, Lily." She looked at him, her eyes wide, a mix of disbelief and hope beginning to shine through. "You really think so?" she asked, her voice trembling a little. "I know so," Jake replied with a smile. "And I think it's time you took that first step. Let's make it happen." Jake's heart raced as he watched Lily's eyes flicker with uncertainty and hope. There she was, this girl who had once been swallowed by the shadows of the streets, now standing at the edge of something new. Something bigger. She had the talent, the spark, but she had never known how to take that first step. Jake felt a sense of responsibility, not just as the cafe owner, but as the person who had seen her potential before she even saw it in herself. Lily didn't respond right away. She stood there, her trumpet still clutched in her hands, as the applause from the small crowd outside the cafe began to die down. People started to wander off, but the moment lingered, heavy with unspoken words. Jake could feel the weight of it, the turning point for both of them. The way she looked at the trumpet, it was like she was trying to decide if this new reality was really possible, or just another fleeting dream? You know, Jake began, breaking the silence. You can keep playing here, in front of my cafe, anytime you want. You're welcome to. But I'm thinking it's time you took it to the next level. Lily blinked, clearly surprised. Next level? What do you mean? Jake leaned forward, speaking with an urgency he hadn't planned on. You've got something people want to hear, Lily, and I think you should perform. Not just on the street. People won't take you seriously that way. I'm talking about a real performance. In front of an audience that actually listens to you, values you. Her eyes flickered with hesitation. But I can't. I don't know how to start. I'm not like those musicians who get booked at venues. I don't even know where to begin. Jake leaned back, trying to make his point clearer. I get it. You've been out of the game for a long time. But everyone starts somewhere. You think I woke up one day with this cafe? No, I worked for it. You've already got the hardest part, your music. All you need is the right chance. She stared at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and guarded optimism. For a brief moment, Jake wondered if he had said too much, pushed too hard. But then Lily's gaze softened, and she sighed as though releasing the weight she had been carrying for years. Do you really think people would want to hear me? She asked quietly, almost too soft for him to hear over the city noise. Jake smiled, leaning in closer. I don't just think it, I know it. You've got something rare, something real. People can feel that. They won't care where you came from. They'll care about what you have to offer right now. Lily's gaze flickered down to her trumpet once more. Her fingers gently brushed over the worn brass, the instrument that had carried her through so many years of hardship. It was the one thing she hadn't given up on, the one thing that kept her tethered to the part of herself she thought was lost forever. But could she really let go of the fear that had been with her for so long? Could she stand in front of an audience again, knowing she had something to prove? I don't know, Jake, she murmured. It's been so long since I've performed for anyone, let alone a real crowd. What if I'm not good enough? What if they laugh at me or think I'm just some street musician? Jake's smile softened. He could see the fear in her eyes, the doubt that had built up over the years. It wasn't about the trumpet, it was about her. She was afraid to believe in herself, afraid to step into a world she had once been part of and then lost. He took a deep breath, his voice more gentle this time. Lily, listen to me. You're not just some street musician. You're a musician, period. And you've got what it takes. No one gets to decide who you are except you. Don't let fear decide for you. Lily looked at him for a long time, her gaze unreadable. Jake held his breath, waiting for her to make up her mind. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, one that could either snap or carry her forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. Okay, I'll do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart leapt in his chest. It was a small step, but it was everything. Are you sure? Lily nodded, her eyes now shining with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I don't know what will happen, but I think I'm ready to try. I'll give it a shot. Jake grinned, unable to contain his excitement. That's the spirit, and don't worry. I'll be there to help you every step of the way. Over the next few days, Jake worked quickly. He knew the right people, the owners of nearby venues, event organizers, and he began making phone calls, setting up opportunities for Lily. She still felt unsure, but the more they talked about it, the more she realized she was ready to push through her doubts. Jake even arranged a small performance for her at a local art gallery, a place with a welcoming atmosphere, where artists and musicians often showcased their work. It wasn't a big stage, but it was a start, a first step into the world she had once belonged to. On the night of the performance, Lily was a bundle of nerves. She had never performed in front of a crowd this intimate before. But as she stood backstage, waiting for her cue, Jake gave her a reassuring nod, his presence a quiet but steady support. "Just play like you did that day outside the cafe," he said. "Let the music speak for itself. You've got this." Lily took a deep breath, clutching her trumpet tightly. This was her moment, her chance to step into the light. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving to herself that she still had the power to dream, to perform, to live her life the way she had always wanted. With one last glance at Jake, she walked out onto the stage. And as she lifted the trumpet to her lips, the world around her faded. It was just her and the music. Now nothing else mattered. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt free. Lily stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest as the murmurs of the crowd drifted to her ears. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just another street corner performance. This wasn't just playing for spare change or food. This was different. This was real. She had agreed to do it. She had agreed to stand in front of strangers and share a piece of herself through the music that had carried her through so many dark days. It had been Jake's belief in her, his unwavering confidence, that had pushed her to this point. She still wasn't entirely sure she was ready, but one thing was for sure, there was no turning back now. The sound of the gallery doors opening signaled that it was time. The low hum of conversation outside began to fade as the spotlight clicked on. Jake's face appeared from behind the curtain, and he gave her a quick thumbs up. It was all the encouragement she needed. She took a deep breath, adjusted the trumpet in her hands, and stepped into the spotlight. The room was smaller than she expected, an intimate space filled with local art and the hum of quiet voices. A mix of artists, collectors, and curious visitors milled around, each seemingly absorbed in their own world, but now they all turned toward her. The atmosphere was different from the streets. Here, the audience wasn't looking for charity. They were looking for something genuine, something real. It was nerve-wracking, but also comforting in a way she hadn't expected. The gallery owner, a friendly man in his late 50s, gave her a welcoming nod as she approached the small stage. "Take your time," he said, his voice warm and encouraging. "The audience here appreciates good music." Lily felt a surge of gratitude toward him, but that didn't ease the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach. She set the trumpet to her lips, but for a moment, she simply stood there. The silence in the room felt heavy, almost oppressive. She wasn't sure how to start. Every note, every movement, felt like it could make or break her. She wanted to play something that would resonate with them, something that would make them feel what she felt when she played. Jake's words echoed in her mind, "Just play like you did outside the cafe." His confidence in her seemed almost too big to fit inside her chest, but it was the only thing she had. She took another deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and let herself sink into the music. Her first notes were shaky, but as the sound of the trumpet filled the space, she began to find her rhythm. The melody was slow at first, like a delicate whisper, but it grew gradually, almost like a secret being shared. She poured her heart into each note, letting her fingers dance over the keys as the emotions she had locked away for so long came rushing to the surface. There was a hesitation at first. She wasn't sure if the audience would understand, if they would connect with the music the way she did. But as the sound began to grow, she saw something in the crowd. A few faces softened, a few heads tilted, and the room seemed to quiet down, their attention focused entirely on her. Lily felt the weight of their gazes, but instead of crushing her, it fueled her. She played louder now, the music flowing more freely, the emotions in her heart finding their way out through the brass of her trumpet. She didn't just play the notes. She felt every one of them. Each breath she took felt like an echo of her past, her struggles, and the painful memories that had shaped her. But it was also a breath of hope, of possibility. As she played, she allowed herself to remember the days when her parents had been a part of her music, when they had dreamed of a future that was full of stages and applause. It was easy to forget how much she had loved that life, how much she had once believed that music could save her. But as she played, it became clear. Music had always been there for her, even when everything else had fallen apart. It was her constant, her anchor. When the final note resonated in the room, it hung in the air for a moment before slowly fading into the silence. Lily opened her eyes to find the room still. The crowd was silent, and for a brief second, her heart stopped. Had they not liked it? Was it too much? Was she not good enough? But then, it came the sound of applause. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew. More people clapped, some standing, others nodding in appreciation. Lily felt a rush of warmth spread through her. They had heard her. They had felt her music. It wasn't just about her talent. It was about her story, her heart, and the raw emotion that poured into every note. She smiled, a small hesitant smile, as she set the trumpet down. The applause continued, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily felt seen, not just as a homeless girl with a trumpet, but as a musician, as an artist. Backstage, Jake was grinning from ear to ear. He had watched the entire performance from behind the curtain, his heart swelling with pride. He knew Lily had it in her. He had always known. The way she played, the way she poured herself into the music, there was no doubt in his mind that she belonged here. She was meant to be on that stage. After the performance, people came up to her one by one, complimenting her on her talent and asking if she would perform again. Some asked where they could hear more of her music, while others just wanted to thank her for sharing such a powerful performance. It was overwhelming, but it was also exactly what she needed: validation, but not just for her talent, for her as a person. For everything she had gone through and everything she had become. As the night went on, Lily found herself talking to a few of the gallery visitors, including the owner, who was already discussing opportunities for her to perform again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a doorway opening. Jake found her at the back of the room later, talking to some of the guests. He watched her for a moment, her face glowing with excitement and disbelief, before he walked up to her, unable to hide his smile. "I told you," he said, his voice full of pride. "You've got something special. This is just the beginning, Lily." She looked at him, a spark of hope finally lighting up her eyes. "You were right. I never thought it would be like this." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, well, it's going to get a lot better. You've only just started." Lily smiled, the weight of her past lifting just a little. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And this new chapter was only just beginning. The next few weeks felt like a blur for Lily. What had started as a simple act of playing for a free meal had quickly spiraled into something much bigger. She went from performing at the small art gallery to being invited to play at a local jazz bar, and then, almost miraculously, she found herself booked for a spot at a well-known music venue downtown. It was the kind of place where people came to see real talent, where musicians didn't just play for tips, but for the love of the craft. A place where people listened, but with each step forward, the pressure mounted. Lily's confidence, once fragile and tentative, was beginning to grow, but so were the doubts. The more she performed, the more the spotlight felt like a place she wasn't sure she belonged. It was one thing to play in front of a small group of strangers, but a packed venue? The thought made her stomach churn. It was a Tuesday evening when Jake called her with news that sent her nerves into overdrive. "Lily, I've got an offer. There's a spot at the city's biggest music festival next month. The headliner dropped out, and they want you to take the slot." Lily almost dropped the phone. "What? Me? At the festival?" Her voice cracked slightly as the weight of the offer sank in. Jake laughed on the other end. "Yeah, you. I've been talking to the organizers, and they heard about your performances. They think you're the real deal, Lily. It's a huge opportunity." Lily's mind went blank. This wasn't just another small venue. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for her. But the idea of performing in front of a massive crowd, with lights and cameras and so much on the line, terrified her. "I don't know, Jake," she said, her voice tight. "I've never played for an audience that big. What if I mess up?" "Lily," Jake's voice softened, "you've got this. I've seen you play, and I've seen how people react. You've got a gift. The only thing you need to do now is trust yourself." She stood still for a moment, her fingers playing absent-mindedly with the edge of the phone. The uncertainty in her mind swirled, but deep down, she knew Jake was right. This was her chance. It wasn't about perfection. It was about sharing her truth. Her music had always been her voice, the only part of her that had never let her down. The question was, could she trust it to speak for her in front of thousands of people? A week before the festival, Jake set up a rehearsal at a small studio with a local jazz band. Lily had played with others before, but never with a full band, and certainly never in a studio like this one. The polished walls, the shiny instruments, the microphone set up just a few feet away. Everything felt so official, so professional. It was a world that she had never fully imagined herself a part of. As the band began to play, Lily hesitated for a brief moment. She looked around at the other musicians. There was the drummer, setting the beat with perfect precision. The bassist, fingers sliding effortlessly over the strings. And the pianist, his fingers a blur as they danced across the keys. Everyone was so sure, so confident, and for a split second, Lily wondered if she was out of her depth. But then the music started, and something inside her clicked. She raised her trumpet to her lips and let the first note flow out, unsure at first, but quickly gaining strength. The band followed her, and it was like magic. She didn't feel like an outsider anymore. The sounds blended together in harmony, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a deep sense of belonging. This wasn't just playing music, it was creating something bigger than herself, something that could move people. That could make them feel. As the session wrapped up, the band leader, a seasoned jazz musician who had seen his fair share of up-and-coming artists, gave her an approving nod. "You've got something," he said with a smile. "That was good, really good. Just trust the music and you'll be fine at the festival." Lily left the studio that evening with a new sense of confidence. The fear was still there, lingering at the edges of her thoughts, but now she could see the possibility, the excitement of playing on a stage that could change her life. She wasn't just a girl with a trumpet anymore. She was an artist with something to say. The day of the festival arrived in a blur. Jake was by her side the whole time, checking in on her, making sure she had everything she needed, offering words of encouragement every time her nerves began to bubble up. As they walked toward the backstage area of the festival venue, Lily's heart raced. Thousands of people were already gathering in the crowd, buzzing with anticipation. The sound of the crowd's chatter and laughter reverberated through the air, but Lily felt strangely calm. It was as if everything she had gone through in her life, the pain, the struggles, the years spent trying to figure out who she was, had led her to this moment. Before she walked on stage, Jake gave her one last piece of advice. Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about anything except the music. It's just you and the trumpet. That's all that matters. With those words, she walked onto the stage. The crowd roared as she stepped into the spotlight, and for a brief moment, Lily felt like she might suffocate under the weight of their attention. But then, she remembered the studio, the rehearsal, the way the music had flowed so naturally, and she lifted her trumpet to her lips. She took a deep breath and started to play. The first note was hesitant, but by the time the second one rang out, she was lost in the sound. The crowd faded away. The lights didn't matter. It was just her and the music. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt free. As she played. She didn't just feel the sound of the trumpet, she felt the pulse of the crowd, the heartbeat of the city, and the weight of all the dreams she had buried. She wasn't just performing. She was living, breathing, and becoming exactly who she was meant to be. When the last note hung in the air, the crowd erupted in applause. Lily stood there, her chest heaving with the adrenaline, her heart soaring with a mixture of disbelief and triumph. She had done it. She had stepped into the world she had once thought impossible, and now, there was no turning back. The sound of the crowd's applause still reverberated in Lily's ears as she made her way off the stage, her heart still racing. The lights, once blinding and intimidating, had now become a comforting glow, a reminder that she had just stepped into a new world, one that had been waiting for her all along. It wasn't just the applause that made her feel alive. It was the overwhelming realization that she had finally found her place, her purpose. Backstage, Jake was grinning from ear to ear. As Lily walked toward him, he couldn't contain his excitement. "I told you," he said, clapping her on the back. "You were incredible. They loved you." Lily smiled, still a little stunned by the whole experience. "I don't know what just happened," she said, still catching her breath. "It's like I was in a dream." "You weren't dreaming, Lily. You were living it." That was real, and it was just the beginning. As the crowd's cheers began to die down, Lily felt a warmth inside her that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the adrenaline from the performance, it was something deeper. Something that came from knowing that she had shared a piece of herself with the world and that the world had embraced it. She had never imagined that music could carry so much weight, could change so much of her reality. But it had. The stage, the spotlight, the people in the audience, they all felt like part of a larger picture, a picture that was just beginning to take shape. The next few days were a whirlwind. The festival had been a huge success, and Lily's performance was being talked about all over town. The local media picked up on her story, and soon she was being interviewed for radio shows and even featured in a local music magazine. It was a far cry from the days when she had sat on the street corner with her trumpet case open, hoping for spare change. Now she was being seen for who she truly was, a musician with a gift. A woman with a story that resonated with people. A survivor who had fought her way to the stage. The excitement was intoxicating, but it was also overwhelming. Lily couldn't help but feel like she was caught between two worlds. The world she had known, where she had struggled to survive, and the world she was now entering, where people saw her for her talent, not her circumstances. She was still getting used to the idea of being recognized for her music, of having people look at her not with pity, but with admiration. It was Jake who helped her navigate this strange new reality. They met up often to talk about her next steps, the future, and the opportunities that were beginning to unfold. He was still the same, always calm and steady, reminding her to take things one step at a time. He never let her get too carried away with the excitement, always bringing her back to the music. "You're not doing this for the fame, Lily," he'd say, his voice serious. "You're doing this because the world needs to hear your music. Remember why you started in the first place. Keep it about the music." But as much as she tried to keep her focus on the music, Lily couldn't ignore the changes happening in her life. She had a manager now, someone who handled her bookings and interviews. People were offering her recording contracts. The doors that had once been closed to her were now wide open, and it was all happening so fast. At times, it felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out over a vast unknown. She could jump, embrace the uncertainty and the thrill of what lay ahead, or she could step back and retreat to the comfort of what she knew. The question haunted her. Was she ready for all of this? Was she really ready to leave her past behind and step into a future that had once felt so far out of reach? One evening, after a particularly overwhelming day of meetings, Lily found herself sitting alone in her apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She hadn't felt this conflicted in months. The music had always been her anchor, but now it was tied to something bigger: expectations, obligations, a life she wasn't sure she was prepared to live. As she sat by the window, Staring out at the city lights, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She was still getting used to the idea of being recognized for her music, of having people look at her not with pity, but with admiration. It was Jake who helped her navigate this strange new reality. They met up often to talk about her next steps, the future, and the opportunities that were beginning to unfold. He was still the same, always calm and steady, reminding her to take things one step at a time. He never let her get too carried away with the excitement, always bringing her back to the music. "You're not doing this for the fame, Lily," he'd say, his voice serious. "You're doing this because the world needs to hear your music. Remember why you started in the first place. Keep it about the music." But as much as she tried to keep her focus on the music, Lily couldn't ignore the changes happening in her life. She had a manager now, someone who handled her bookings and interviews. People were offering her recording contracts. The doors that had once been closed to her were now wide open, and it was all happening so fast. At times, it felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out over a vast unknown. She could jump, embrace the uncertainty and the thrill of what lay ahead, or she could step back and retreat to the comfort of what she knew. The question haunted her. Was she ready for all of this? Was she really ready to leave her past behind and step into a future that had once felt so far out of reach? One evening, after a particularly overwhelming day of meetings, Lily found herself sitting alone in her apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She hadn't felt this conflicted in months. The music had always been her anchor, but now it was tied to something bigger: expectations, obligations, a life she wasn't sure she was prepared to live. As she sat by the window, staring out at the city lights, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, there stood Jake, his familiar, reassuring smile the only thing that seemed to make sense in that moment. "You okay?" he asked, stepping inside when she motioned for him to. Lily didn't answer right away. She just sank into the couch, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice cracking slightly. "This all feels like too much. What if I can't handle it? What if I'm just not cut out for all this attention, all these people expecting something from me?" Jake sat down next to her, looking at her with an understanding that only someone who had watched her grow could possess. "Lily, this is your journey. No one expects you to be perfect. You're not supposed to have all the answers. But you've already done the hardest part. You took the chance. You played, you put yourself out there. Now the rest will come." She looked at him, her eyes searching for something to hold on to. "But what if I lose myself in all this? What if the music changes or the pressure gets too much?" Jake smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The music can't change, Lily, not if you don't let it. The world may change around you, but you're still the same person who played that first song on the street corner. Keep your heart in the music, and you'll be just fine." Lily nodded slowly, her breathing calming as she let his words sink in. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't need to. She just needed to trust herself, trust the music, and keep moving forward. As Jake left that night, Lily felt something shift inside her. The uncertainty was still there, but it was no longer something to be afraid of. It was part of the journey, part of the growth she was going through. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to walk it. The next morning, Lily sat down at her trumpet and played. This time, it wasn't just to prove something to herself or to anyone else. It was for the joy of the music. And that was all she needed. The rest, she realized, would come in time. The weeks that followed the festival were a wind of new opportunities, and Lily's life was changing in ways she could have never imagined. She was no longer just the girl with the trumpet on the street corner. She was becoming a name, a brand, and a rising star in the music world. But amidst the excitement and the rush of performances, interviews, and radio shows, one thing remained constant: the music. Lily had learned that, despite the fame and recognition, it was the music that kept her grounded. It wasn't the applause or the flashing lights. It was the feeling of her fingers on the trumpet, the vibrations that ran through her body with each note. Music was the one thing she had never doubted, the one thing that had always been hers, no matter what else had happened in her life. But there were still moments when she wondered if this was really her life now. Would she ever get used to the constant attention? Would the music always feel as pure, as true as it had when she played on the streets? Or would the pressures of success change it forever? One night, after a sold-out show at a well-known jazz club, Jake met her backstage, just as he had done so many times before. He'd become more than just her mentor. He was a constant, a reminder of who she had been before all the fame. And tonight, as they sat together on the edge of the stage, he could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. "You've been amazing out there," he said, his voice calm but full of pride. Lily smiled, but it was a little strained. "It feels like everything's moving so fast. I don't know if I'm keeping up or if I'm just letting it carry me." Jake leaned back, crossing his arms and looking at her with a knowing expression. "It's okay to feel like that. You've been thrown into a world that's completely different from what you were used to. But that's not a bad thing, Lily. You've earned your place here. And trust me, your music will never change if you don't let it." Lily stared at her trumpet, which was resting beside her on the stage. It had been through so much with her, through every street corner, every hardship, and every triumph. It was as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. But even now, as she looked at it, she couldn't help but wonder if it would ever feel the same again, with the spotlight on her and the world watching. "I'm afraid I'll lose myself in all of this," she said quietly. "I'm afraid the music will start to feel like a performance, not something I do for me." Jake nodded, understanding her fear. "It's easy to get caught up in what others expect of you. But remember why you started. You didn't pick up the trumpet to get attention. You played because it was your way of telling the world who you are. Don't lose sight of that." She took a deep breath, his words sinking in. The doubts were still there, lurking at the edges of her mind, but she felt a flicker of reassurance. She wasn't in this alone. She had her music, and she had Jake, and most importantly, she had her heart, her passion for the sound that had carried her through it all. The next morning, after a long night of performing and meeting with fans, Lily found herself back in the small apartment she had rented. The apartment was nothing like the mansions and penthouses she'd visited during her rise to fame, but it was hers. It was quiet, personal, and comforting, a space where she could still hear the echoes of her own thoughts, the whispers of a life she was building for herself. She sat at the window, looking out over the city. It had been months since she had first stepped onto that stage at the music festival, but everything still felt so surreal. She could hardly believe how much had changed in such a short time. The magazine covers, the glowing reviews, the record deals. It was everything she had dreamed of, and yet, something was still missing. Not from the music, but from herself. She knew she wasn't the same person she had been before, but who was she now? Lily picked up her trumpet, the smooth brass cool in her hands. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply before beginning to play. The first few notes were tentative, as if she were still searching for her voice. But then the music began to flow, and with it, the clarity she had been missing. As she played, it wasn't the sound of the crowd she could hear in her mind. It was her own heartbeat, the rhythm that had never faltered. The music filled the room, rising higher with each breath, each note. She played like she hadn't in months, free, unburdened by expectations, unafraid of the future. The city outside faded into the background, and in that moment, it was just her and the trumpet, the way it had always been. She wasn't playing for anyone else. She was playing for herself. When she finally stopped, she felt something shift inside her. The doubts that had clouded her thoughts were gone, replaced by a deep sense of peace. This was what mattered: the music, the joy, the connection she had with every note. Everything else was just the bonus, the reward for following her heart. That evening, Lily walked into the recording studio with a new sense of purpose. She had come to realize that the path forward wasn't about pleasing anyone else or chasing after the next big gig. It was about staying true to the music, to the part of herself that had been with her all along. The world could change around her, but her music would remain constant as long as she let it. Over the next few months, Lily began to take control of her career in ways she hadn't before. She chose the projects that resonated with her, turned down offers that didn't align with her vision, and began recording an album that felt like the culmination of everything she had learned. It was a reflection of her journey, her struggles, her triumphs, her voice. When the album was released, it soared to the top of the charts, but it wasn't the success that mattered.